Let's dive straight in. This is the Royal Enfield Super Meteor 650 and we're finally riding it today. We're going to be answering the questions that you guys have been asking. A lot about this motorcycle is already known. We've already shown you what it looks like, told you all the specs and figures, and even gotten up close with it in a walk around. So today we're going to be focusing on the riding experience. The big question that most of you seem to be asking is, how easy is it to ride? How manageable is this? This is a significantly larger and heavier motorcycle than the existing RE650s, and those are already fairly hefty bikes that can become a bit of a handful at times. So what's this one like? There's no two ways about it. This motorcycle weighs upwards of 240 kilograms. And when maneuvering the bike at low speeds, you do have to be cognizant of this fact and plan ahead a little. That being said, it's certainly not what you'd call cumbersome. Because it's a long, low motorcycle with much of the mass concentrated between the wheelbase, it's not as top-heavy as something like an Interceptor. And the low seat height is also a confidence boost. Overall, it feels well-balanced, steering effort is fairly light, and this is a manageable motorcycle, even if you're not heftily built like me. Another question here is about high-speed stability. This is a cruiser, so it's supposed to be able to sit at high speeds for long durations. But the Interceptor, for example, isn't excellent in this area, especially at triple-digit speeds. You can run into some stability issues. But this is an all-new frame, an all-new suspension setup, so what's this one like at high speeds? The short answer is that the Super Meteor feels perfectly planted and sure-footed at all speeds. The longer wheelbase and the more raked-out front end certainly help here, and there was never any wallowing or wobbling over the course of our ride. Body control was also excellent, and the suspension setup kept things well in check even when we encountered bumps and undulations at triple-digit speeds. Let's address the issue that's been playing on a lot of people's minds: ground clearance. It's 135 mm on the spec sheet, but how does it fare in the real world? On most days, we would be grateful for Rajasthan's largely excellent road network, but today we were determined to put the Super Meteor to the test. So we hunted for some broken patches and speed breakers and attacked them with a pillion on board. Loaded up with close to 150 kilos, the bike managed to clear everything, never once scraping its belly. So as long as you don't try to ride this like an ADV, ground clearance should not be an issue. Now, this being a cruiser, a lot of you are also asking about long distance comfort. What's this bike like over a full day of riding? Now, as you can see, I'm sat in a fairly comfortable position here, but the answer to this question is a little more complex than you might think. We were fortunate enough to spend the day with two variants of the Super Meteor. The range-topping Celestial version, which gets a windscreen, a deluxe touring seat and a pillion backrest as standard, as well as the Interstellar variant, which misses out on these bits. Long-distance comfort aboard the Celestial motorcycle is excellent. The touring seat is supremely comfortable, and the rider's triangle puts you in a nice relaxed position but without any excessive pressure on your tailbone. Overall, this is a motorcycle I would happily spend a full day on, but there is a bit of a weak link here, and that's the windscreen. Now, a number of riders of varying heights all experienced varying amounts of buffeting at high speeds. For most riders of about average height, the wind protection zone will end about halfway up your helmet. So the turbulent wind catching the top of your helmet will cause a little discomfort at high speeds. What also remains to be seen is how this windscreen performs at low speeds in dense city traffic. It's quite a large unit, and the smaller windscreen on my classic 350 long-termer already makes things quite stuffy in Bombay traffic. On the Interstellar variant, you won't have to deal with buffeting, but you will have to contend with wind blast if you want to sit at speeds of about 100 kph or more. But what you really miss on this bike is the touring seat. The stock seat does look cooler with a split design and a nice scooped out look, but it becomes a literal pain in the backside after a couple of hours on board. Now, what also helps you tackle a long day of riding without fatigue is the ride comfort on this bike. Yes, there is a firm edge to the suspension setup, but considering the cruiser format, the Super Meteor does a decent job of tackling our roads. You do feel road imperfections, but it takes the harshness out of them and the impact is significantly reduced. That being said, we've only sampled it on Rajasthan's roads so far, where even the worst patches would pass off as some of the best roads in Mumbai. The real test will be when we can attack the nasty potholes and speed breakers in our hometown.
Ultimately, the touring seat makes a big difference to overall comfort, and it's something we'd highly recommend, either by going for the Celestial variant or speccing it as an accessory on the lower variants.
This is a long distance machine and you probably want to share this experience with a special someone or carry your belongings along the way. So how does the Super Meteor fare in terms of pillion comfort and luggage? Well, once again, the answer depends on how exactly you go about buying this motorcycle.
All the comfort that the touring seat gives to the rider is transferred to the pillion as well. Not only is the seat base much larger than stock, there's also significantly more padding, meaning you're seated much higher up, which in turn means your legs are in a more relaxed position too. Throw in the pillion backrest and your passenger will have no complaints even after a long day of riding. So on the Celestial variant, pillion comfort is once again top notch. Once again though, the stock pillion seat is nowhere near as comfortable, and it's best used for occasional short distance trips within the city. As far as luggage goes, Royal Enfield is offering a very neat looking pair of hard panniers as accessories, which can be fitted onto any of the variants like all the accessories in the catalogue. Total volume is a decent 35 litres, and there's also a top box under development which will measure 28 litres and is being designed to fit a full face helmet. Yes, this is pretty much the same engine as the Interceptor and the Continental, but that's no bad thing, because the 648cc parallel twin is perfectly suited to this cruiser role. It's as tractable as ever, gutsy at the bottom end, and fueling is clean and smooth too. Then there's a noticeable surge in the mid-range, and the top end actually feels quite strong, which isn't really the case with the Interceptor or the GT. We'll have to ride them back to back to be sure, but the Super Meteor does get a new airbox and an exhaust system, and therefore different mapping too. This is a heavier bike than the Interceptor, but it's running slightly shorter overall gearing, so on the whole it feels about as quick. It's a flexible motor, it sounds and feels great at leisurely cruising speeds as well as a steady 100 kph pace. Up to this point, the vibrations are perfectly acceptable, and whatever little there are, they add to the character of the bike. But beyond 100 kph, we had a buzz that began to creep into the handlebars. But these were brand new bikes with fresh engines, and the buzz was beginning to smoothen out a little by our second and final day of riding. Engine mounting methods have changed on the Super Meteor, and we'll need to spend some more time with this bike to see what the engine smoothness is like in the long run. Usually, when discussing motorcycles at this price point, fuel efficiency is not a big consideration. But this being a cruiser, what you will want to know is tank range on a full tank. Now, to get an exact idea of fuel efficiency on this motorcycle, we will need to spend some more time with it in the future, but this same engine on the existing RE650s will give you around 25 kpl give or take, which when you combine with a 15.7 litre fuel tank here, you should be able to get about 350 kilometers on a full tank.
This being a cruiser, corner carving is definitely not a number one priority, but bikers love to know how motorcycles handle, so how does the Super Meteor fare in the twisties?
You'd think a long, heavy motorcycle would need some muscling around, but this one is actually a reasonably willing handler. You don't need a lot of effort to tip it in, and unless you're riding like a hooligan or using some really poor techniques, you'll have enough cornering clearance to have some fun in the twisties. Obviously, it's no lightweight corner carver, but it's a predictable and well-behaved motorcycle in the corners. It's a similar story with the brakes too. They aren't super sharp, and you wouldn't want them to be on a bike like this. But give them a good pull and the bike comes to a stop well, always feeling in control. As is typical with cruisers, the rear brake ends up contributing quite a bit to the stopping power, so it's nice that there is a big 300mm disc at the back. Now that we've assessed the individual strengths and weaknesses of this bike, let's talk about how it all comes together. Quite simply, this is a motorcycle that makes the call of the open road very difficult to ignore. The Super Meteor just makes you want to hop on board and chase the horizon. And you can do this at a leisurely pace with the motor purring along and the scenery slowly changing around you, or you could do it at a 100 kph cruise with the world blasting past in the opposite direction. On the top Celestial variant, you can do this in a great deal of comfort for pretty much the entire day with a pillion and luggage too. So as far as cruisers go, this is a very good one, and one that also works well in the Indian environment from everything we've experienced so far. Of course, it's not flawless though. The standard seats for both rider and pillion can improve to offer a better baseline level of comfort, somewhere between these current standard seats and the touring seat. The windscreen could do with a little redesign to address the buffeting issue.
And then there's also the question of seeing how much the engine smoothens out once it's run in, because a buzz-free handlebar would go a long way on a bike like this.
Beyond these issues, it really feels like nitpicking because my remaining complaints are about things like instrumentation not being unique enough to this motorcycle and an unsightly gap around the fuel filler cap, which stands out when the rest of the bike is finished so well.
By this point, hopefully you've gathered that the Super Meteor has shaped up to be a rather pleasant motorcycle that fits the cruiser bill quite well, which leaves just one question. But it is the big one. Does it justify its price tag?
The Super Meteor's starting price will be 3.49 lakh rupees ex-showroom India. And yes, that makes it over 60,000 rupees more expensive than the Interceptor. But then this also feels like a much more expensive machine than the Interceptor. First, there's all the additional hardware you're getting here. A Showa upside-down fork, the Tripper navigation pod as standard, an LED headlight that works quite well, alloy wheels, beefy and premium adjustable levers. And then there's all the materials used, the solid build quality and the excellent finishing across the motorcycle. There are a lot of aluminum components in sight and in reach, panel gaps are neat and tidy for the most part, and paint finish is great. So yes, the Super Meteor is the most expensive RE on sale today, but it feels it. And even the top spec Celestial machine, coming in at 3.79 lakh rupees ex-showroom, manages to justify its asking price. Like Royal Enfield's other 650s, the Super Meteor stands in a class of its own, in the sense that nobody can offer anything remotely similar for the price.